Shalom from Israel, dear family and friends, and we're marking the promises of God in our Bibles. We're in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel means God strengthens, God empowers. And I pray that God will empower you today to do His will and to be a blessing to everyone you know. In Ezekiel 14, several of these chapters have what I like to call negative promises, where it's a prediction of punishment or chastisement. I'm not going to read all of those, but in amongst those, it says over and over that they will know. Ye shall know that I am the Lord. Ye shall know that I am the Lord. In Ezekiel 14, one of these negative promises, in verse 9, it says, and if the prophet be deceived, he's talking to a prophet he's going to cut off from amongst his people, those that teach the wrong way, not the right way of God. In verse 9, it says, and if the prophet be deceived, when he hath spoken a thing, I, the Lord Yahweh, have deceived that prophet. And so God here is taking responsibility for the deception that some people are left in as an act of His judgment. God controls all knowledge. He controls who knows what and who knows what when they know it. So any revelation, insight, knowledge, understanding that we have is an abundant, merciful gift from Him. And we should pray for more enlightening of our eyes and more understanding. That God would use us to share His message, His promises to other people, that they might come to know the crucified and risen Messiah of Israel, Yeshua, and by His precious blood have their sins forgiven. And so we mark these promises and we endeavor to share them with others. It says here in verse 10 and 11 after verse 9, and I will stretch out my hand upon him and will destroy him from the midst of my people Israel. Verse 10, and they shall bear the punishment of their iniquity. The punishment of that, the prophet, shall be even as the punishment of him that seeketh unto him, that the house of Israel may go no more astray from me, neither be polluted any more with all their transgressions, but they may be my people, and that I may be their God. God has covenanted Himself to be the God of the Jewish people, to fulfill all the promises He gave. The entire Bible is an outworking of the Abrahamic covenant. Genesis 12, verse 3. I'll bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee, Abraham, shall all of the families of the earth be blessed. And we see here that in amongst this really barrage of negative promises, it says in verse 13 that God will send famine, He will cut off man and beast from it. And it says in verse 14, though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they should deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, saith the God, the Lord God of Israel, Yahweh Adonai. And so these men of God, Job, of course, was an intercessor. His three friends, so-called, he was able to pray for them at the end, and God, who always works through mediation, used the prayers of Job to be a blessing to those three men that had really not been very much of a good friend, had they? They'd tortured him. They had harangued and incessantly come up with all of their stupid theories about why Job was suffering, and none of those things were right. But Job then turns around and he's a blessing to them. But in this coming destruction, in this coming judgment, even if Job prayed, or Daniel who prayed toward Jerusalem, even if he prayed, he would only rescue himself. And Noah, the great man of God that brought us through the flood and out the other side, he would only save himself because the people's sin had increased to such a degree. But you know, it says where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. And so our good news to people is that God's loving character, God so loved the world that he wants everyone to come to know him who will believe in his Messiah. So mark verse 14 there. Again in verse 20 it says the same thing. Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, saith the Lord Yahweh, the Lord God Adonai, they shall deliver neither son nor daughter. They shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness. And you know, this reminds me of a saying, God doesn't have any grandchildren. You're either a son of God, a daughter of God, a child of God. You're not a believer because your parents were, because they took you to church. You're not an automobile by being in a garage. And so each and every one of us has to come to know the Lord God of Israel through his Messiah personally, in a very personal way, not just we come from a believing home. And so that's something that needs to be stressed today. And you'd think we'd have learned this a long time ago, but people tend to forget it. People tend